Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. Welcome back to the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I am thrilled to have another returning guest this week. Ellen Hooper is here once again with us. If you remember correctly, she was here a few months ago, probably 6 months ago now, to talk all about how to share the workload, which was such a great conversation and I loved it. And we are back again today to go deeper into how can we start to use our cycle and start to create a rhythmic workflow in a workforce that's really meant for the male or the male hormonal system. But if you haven't listened to the last episode and you don't know who Ellen is, Ellen Hooper is a people and culture expert. She's a certified coach with the International Coaching Federation, an accredited mediator, a passionate speaker, and someone who loves to help individuals and groups to grow and develop. Her clients call her a coaching magician, and I would totally agree with that, and a total legend who helps them get unstuck. And so today we are going to get unstuck with this work idea or concept of how we can work cyclically. So welcome back. I'm so excited to have you here. It's so good to see your face.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, we're developing quite the international alliance across country. In case you haven't picked up from my accent, I live and have always lived in Melbourne, Australia. Thanks for having me back. This is a tricky one, this topic.
Oh my gosh. It is a tricky one, but it's one that, I have not conquered it yet. Like I have theories in my head. We've both been part of Kate Northrup's program to learn about how to use our cycle for our work days. And so I have concepts, but I still fall into old patterns but this is the way it has to be done. Or before I know it, I'm like pushing myself the way I would have pushed myself 10 years ago. And so I think it's kind of fun to now catch myself and go, wait a minute, why are you doing that? Why are you acting that way?
I'm so glad you said that, because I also have this real kind of a theoretical, practical gap when it comes to this. And I think that's really, it's useful for us to kind of start there. I think there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, we're so ingrained in kind of traditional ways of working. Neither of us kind of had this type of education as children and young adults and as graduates in workplaces. It's still, I think, a bit of a weird or taboo thing to talk about in workplaces, which is interesting. And then we kind of come back to the fact that objectively, the working world was really set up for men by men. And so kind of integrating this way of operating in a cyclical way with the very kind of real structures that exist in workplaces is really tricky. And I think it would be useful for us today to talk about, I think, like, let's tackle the hardest version of this, which is if you're employed by someone. Because you and I both work for ourselves, and it's so funny because even then we find it hard. But some of the tricks, that I use, like putting my cycle in my calendar, is that realistic for someone who's on Outlook and has a shared calendar with 50 other team members? So I'm really keen to work through how we can try to really make this practically work in kind of more traditional workplace settings as well.
Yeah. And, traditional workplace settings, how we can make it work. But then I would also like to weave in with that, how to make it work when you are a mom, right? I think this is another reality to the complicated.
You just leveled us up, Kate.
I know.
Let's go to the hardest possible version.
We're just going to go like as deep as we possibly can here. Because when you think about it, the workplace was set up with this expectation that women would be at home and caring for the children. And then there was like this women want to have careers. Women want to explore ways to use their mind and to create something, or to create a version of themselves in a career element. And how do we fit being mom still in that? Because that's like been my biggest struggle, I think. And that was a really big conversation with my husband, because I remember at one point him going, well, are you ever going to just go and get a job? Because like, I love what I do. I love what I do, but entrepreneurship, it's hard. There's months where you don't get any money, especially when you're
100%.
starting out. Like it is like being an artist. You are committing to something without knowing if you're going to get any return in value. But I remember him saying, like, at what point are we going to like say this isn't working, and are you going to go out and get a job? And I was like, but that doesn't work for me, because first of all, I think I'm in a spot now where I don't know if I could conform to a bunch of rules set by men of how I need to operate in a workplace. But also, I want to be able to have freedom to have time off with my kids, or to be homesick with them and not get punished because I've taken time off. And that was a hard thing for us to explore, of me going, but this doesn't necessarily work with me. And so then I got him on board with not allowing, that's a wrong way to put it, but getting him on board to like buy into my idea of what I wanted my career to look like. And then realizing, like, there was at one point, he's like, well, can we just pull back? Can you not invest so much in your business right now? Can we wait until the kids are older? Like, why do we have to do it all right now then? And a part of me is like, because if I don't do it, like, a part of my identity is lost. And I think that's what a lot of us women feel, is that we want to be moms. We want to be able to be there for our children, but we also want to be able to have a container where we can develop who we are as me, as Kate Nagai, and you as Ellen, right? Like, how can we create an identity that's not mommy or other expectations or little pillars that we put into? So,
and we have a great vernacular in Australia, which is based on a book by Annabelle Crabb, who's a really preeminent journalist here in Australia, and it's called The Wife Drought. And I just love that, because and I think it's got the byline, why it's going to come to me, why women need wives and men need lives. And yeah, we absolutely have seen this massive shift in the way that women engage with work. And we haven't seen such a massive shift at the way that men engage in home. And I was talking to you just before, I am in the process of writing a book about working parents. It's a speculative project. But because of that, I have been interviewing lots and lots of dads. And I've been specifically looking for dads who, I don't even have the right words for it, but I've been kind of referring to them as involved dads, dads who parent in a quite contemporary way, or in the way that they want to, and make some adjustments and even sacrifices at work in order to do that. Yeah, and it's been really, really cool talking to them. I think that being that type of dad right now is probably what it was like to be a working mum in the 90s. Like it's kind of not like crazy.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not the well-trodden path.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. One of the themes that's coming out from the dads that I've been talking to, the difference between dads who want and have a desire to engage with work and parenting in a different way, compared to the dads who actually like take the bold step and do it, is those dads don't care what other people think.
Yeah.
And that's so similar. Like, I think that's a really big answer as well to the conundrum that you're talking about too. How much of what we think is the right way to parent actually belongs to other people compared to us. Yeah, is really, really, really interesting. And I'm going to pick you up on some language, because you were talking about that your way of working was the right thing for you, but I actually think it sounds like it was the right thing for your family. And so there's a bit of contradiction there too, which is like, are you going to go and get a traditional job because that income will be good? And then, like, no shade to your lovely husband, but then
I throw
also
him under the bus all the time.
Yeah, but then also can you stop working so hard? So those kind of things show us that actually the benefit that you make in the way that you parent and the way that you've set up your work life is a benefit for the family. It's not just a benefit for you. And I think that's really important, just because there's so much narrative and judgment around women for being selfish for literally any decision. Like, doesn't matter which decision you make, it's easy to be labeled as selfish. But if we can start thinking about, no, I'm actually, because we all are scanning for what's the right decision for this kind of collective emotional well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being for the family. And if we can talk about it like that, I think that's really useful.
Well, and I think you just touched on a really good thing, is that it was what was beneficial for the family. And if we want to reframe that, women working within their cycle is beneficial for the company or is beneficial for the workplace. We just got to figure out how to do this and how to sell people on it. So I think this is like a great little like meander conversation.
It's time. Let's get to the
getting into the good stuff. And it's really interesting because I was reading an article, it was probably a year and a half ago, when I was researching a lot about work life and the cyclical work life, because I have a whole module in one of my courses on how to start to integrate your cycle into your work life. And this article was so beautiful in what it wrote about the fact that it may feel uncomfortable. Like when you say like, we need a period positivity policy in our, period positivity policy in our company, that there's going to be those men or those people that are very old school that are going to be like, this is crap. Like, what, do I get a special day off? But you got to remember that was probably the same response that society had the first time a maternity leave was introduced into the workplace, right? Absolutely. And now it's pretty mainstream in most countries that this is just the way, because it is in the best interest. And there is health benefits for a woman not to go back to work a week after she just gave birth, right? And so the same kind of idea. So like, if this is like, well, how this is impossible, just remember at one time, maternity leaves were impossible as well. And now look where we're at. So I really believe that the work and what we're talking about today is us challenging the status quo and saying, there's got to be a way. It's going to be uncomfortable in the beginning, but it's not impossible. And pretty soon it's going to be normal. And it's going to be normal for my daughters. It's going to become a normal thing eventually, hopefully.
It's really cool. And over here in Australia, the discussion around menopause at work has increased significantly. Are you guys seeing that as well in Canada? Yeah, and it's interesting. It's actually interesting, that discussion about menopause then that opens the discussion about cycles in general, because it's like those are things that we experience at all points of our lives. Yeah, so let's talk about how to make it work at work.
Yeah. Do you have any wisdom? Do you want to kickstart this conversation?
I'm sure that your listeners will be really across this, but people tuning in, my listeners, do you want to just give us a really quick summary? Look, I'm being so bossy on your podcast.
No, boss away.
Yeah, of the 4 cycles and the kind of activities that really suit each cycle, because I think that'd be really helpful grounding, and you're the expert on this.
Yeah, I love this. This is like everything that I live for right now. So our 4 phases of our cycle, there's 2 ways to look at it. You can look at it clinically, which is like your follicular, your ovulation, your luteal, your menstruation, which I'll get into a bit more. Or what I like to always teach is starting to identify it as like these seasonal transitions. So our inner spring, our inner summer, our inner fall, our inner winter. The beautiful thing about women's bodies is that we are cycles within cycles. So what we are experiencing and how we're feeling in our body in those 4 different clinical phases of our cycle that I mentioned is really, like, if you really think about it, you can relate to it in the same way as looking at the moon cycle, as looking at the earth cycle, as looking at our life cycle. Those same sensations that you feel, we kind of feel as women throughout a monthly cycle. We just get little tidbits of it. So we are not meant to be one person. We are meant to be 4 different women with 4 different variations, with 4 different sets of needs, with 4 different desires. And that's what we're really seeing in the workspace. So our 4 phases, we'll start with the inner spring. So the inner spring, much like our follicular phase, is this time of emerging. Like, you're coming out of those bleed days where you were exhausted, you weren't feeling good, you're just like feeling very low in life. And all of a sudden you get like this little bit of estrogen in the system, and there's this rising hormonal, what do I want to call it? Like sensory in the body that's saying, hey, wake up, we're ready to get started again. And so like this is a really good time for us to think, like we usually have a lot of energy here. So this is when our brain actually starts to get primed with estrogen for language, for communication skills. So this is where we start to come out and we're like, I've got this great idea and I'm going to put it into practice now. I'm going to sell this, right? And so our emergence phase, or this part of our follicular phase, is really about us coming into a new project. Think of it as like, I'm coming in with all these ideas. I've got the excitement behind me. I've got the language skills. I have the energy. So technically I could probably work a little bit later, and we actually have a desire. I have to be really careful in my follicular phase that I don't start working after supper again, because I have that tendency of turning on my laptop and go, I'm just going to send this one email. And before I know it, it's midnight, because I just get sucked into the vortex. Like I've just got so much of me to give here. And so then that's our follicular phase, or our inner spring. Then we move into our inner summer, also known as our ovulation time. And ovulation is all about visibility. Think about it. Ovulation is that time where we want to be seen. We want to attract people. We want to be known. This is why we can create life here. This is why we want to interact and engage and find partnerships. But we also do that in our social life. Like this is where we really want people to like us and to be seen. We're not just like have better communication skills, but we actually want to communicate to create relationship. So this is the time where not only can we sell ourselves, but we can also like get people on board with our ideas. I always say this is the perfect time in our cycle to ask for raises, because like we can sell, like, this is why I'm an amazing employee and this is why you need to love me. And this is what's going to happen. Right. And we're really good listeners here too. So this is like your public speaking phase. Like this is really about like, I am visible. I'm here to be seen by the world. And then we move into our luteal phase, also known as our inner fall, which is what a lot of us refer to as our PMS phase, right? I often say a lot of PMS is because we are not honoring that shift from being very outward with our energy, like we were in the first half of our cycle, and tuning in to now being more inward. So our luteal phase is this down regulation of estrogen. So that stuff that was priming the brain for critical thinking and language, it's like, we're out of here. We're done with our part. Now progesterone's here and progesterone's going to take over. Progesterone's not enhancer of critical thinking. Progesterone instead makes us want to be more creative. It actually activates the right hemisphere of our brain. So it makes us want to create. It makes us want to refine. This is a good time in our cycle to sit down and look at what we started in our follicular phase and that we carried throughout in our ovulation, and go, okay, now, was that perfect? Probably not. There's probably things that were not great. So let's get rid of some of those elements, or let's refine them. Let's think about how we're going to fix this and make it even better. So this is where we really sit and we like to fine tune things. And if you're someone like me, I can't fine tune things when I have a lot of noise around me, whether that be kids, whether that be coworkers, whether that be being pulled into 100 different meetings. Like I need very isolated, focused time by myself, right? And that's where I get my productivity done. And then we move into our inner winter, or our menstruation. And I think most of us know menstruation is this time where we feel like crap. And we feel like crap because our body is literally doing whatever it needs to signal to us, you need to slow the hell down. Like you need to pause. And so I get that doesn't necessarily work in the workforce, but menstruation is a really good time for us to start playing around with this idea of like, how can I just be 10 or 20% less of myself to everybody else? Like, what can I do to really conserve my energy and take care of myself? I'm totally an advocate for just calling in sick those days. I feel like if you feel like crap and you're pulling yourself into work, you wouldn't do that if you were vomiting because you had the flu, right? And no male would expect that. And a lot of women sometimes have really big menstruation disruptions that feel like the flu. And so why are we saying it's okay for us just to push through because it's just our period and going to work? Our productivity sucks during this phase. So instead, this is a really good time in our cycle to close the door and to do those things that take zero brain power, because now we like all of our hormones are at their lowest, which means it's signaling to the body to extract, to eliminate. And so to try to do a presentation or to really structure a crafty email or to do these more complicated tasks, we don't actually have the brain bandwidth to do that, to entertain that thought, right? Like we really have low energy. And the more that we can honor that and do things to support that, I personally believe is what creates more rhythm and more ease in our menstruation. But it also helps us to come into the next cycle where we go back into that follicular, back into that inner spring, and we come out even stronger. So that's kind of like a quick little summary of the four phases.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I always keep in my mind the words that Kate Northrup uses. So she talks about plan and initiate.
Yeah.
Connect and be visible.
Yep.
I feel like this is a little quiz for me. Complete and focus. And then rest and restore. And those are really nice words, because just talking about that kind of navigating, the taboo versus do you want to be a champion of change? I think each of us just really get to choose where we want to sit on that spectrum. If you work in a really male-dominated industry, you're probably having a hard enough time. Well, you can let the rest of us kind of take up the mantle. So those words are really nice, because those are really nice words to put in your diary that are actually like give you little prompts, but they're not kind of quite as clinical as some of the more like cycle menstruation words. So that can be really useful. Then the next thing I think that's really useful for work is going through your kind of the work that you do, the kind of typical tasks that you do, and actually putting them into those different phases. So what's the work that's best done in plan and in initiate? What's the work that's best done in connect and be visible? And what's the work that's best done in complete and focus? And then what's the kind of things that are boring, we put off forever, that are really good to do in that rest phase? Like that feels like you're filing emails kind of thing.
For me,
yeah,
that's when I do all of my like receipts. Right?
yeah.
I'm so bad at bookkeeping, and I have a bookkeeper and I love her, and she just knows that she's not getting anything from me until I'm in that like lethargic state where I'm like, I can just click a picture of this receipt and I can upload it. Like that's all my brain needs to know how to do.
Yeah,
And
that's
even
right.
then I still mess it up sometimes. And she's just like, I get it. I understand where you're at. So.
But it is really useful to know that there are things that are useful to be done in that time, that it is a waste of your good quality energy to do in other times. And then the next thing, I think work, if we can broadly divide your work into responsive, so that's kind of like uncontrollable, contextual, external factors will be at play. There might even be things in there that are really set, like board meetings or conferences, those kind of really like the dates are set. And discretionary, that can be really useful too, because you might be listening to this thinking, like I work in investment banking, or I work as, I'm someone's executive assistant. Like I just, I don't have control over any of this stuff. This is just isn't going to fit in with my workplace. But if we can start to see the things that we can actually bend and shift in ways that best suit our cycles versus things that kind of we have less control over, that can be really useful too. Because even if you can be pulling 10%, 20%, 30% of your work in ways that are really aligned to your cycle, you'll still be protecting your energy. And then as we get more practiced at it, we can start actually seeing how much we can kind of push the boundaries, and how proactive we can be about, asking for particular dates for things, or asking if things can be moved or shifted. So we've got that. We've got the putting those words in your diary. We've got breaking your work into responsive and discretionary and seeing what you can plot through. And then the next thing is there any of your work that's rhythm or routine based? Like lots of us will produce monthly reports or quarterly things. And if you can shift those rhythmic things to be well aligned with your cycle, that's a really great tip as well. And some of us will have more autonomy over that than others.
Yeah. And there's definitely things in your schedule that are predictable, that, are just, every job has job duties that are going to fall into that predictability pillar. And then there's always those things that are unexpected, like you had just mentioned as well. But I think some of the beauty of this as well is, well, one is knowing that when it is unexpected, that we have the ability to reflect about, is this my optimal time? And if not, can I set boundaries around it? Can I ask and know why I'm asking, right? And I think this is really important, because sometimes when we're asked to do things and it's falling out of those categories, or it's falling into one of the categories where we're not optimal, we know why we don't feel great about it. But then if we have to do it, if there's no option that we have to do it, we can give ourselves so much forgiveness and compassion that we flubbered through it, and that's fine. Like a perfect example of this is, some of my speaking opportunities or going on podcasts, I try to plan it as best as I can. And sometimes my period comes early, or sometimes I just cannot control, it's just out of my control. It's on this day and I've got to make it work. But there is something within myself that I can call in and take ownership of like, well, I'm bleeding. I don't know if I'm going to be the best speaker, but I'm going to go out there because I know that I know this stuff, right? And if I stumble on my words, oh well. If I can't think of that word, I will just try to find a way to make a joke out of it and move on. But I'm not going to go afterwards and go, well, I crapped the bed on that one. And, that was the worst experience ever. I'm sure no one was entertained. I'm sure I'm a horrible human being. We can really give ourselves so much more self-compassion when we know it. Now, I'm so comfortable with my cycle now that I often just own it. I'm just like, so this was out of my schedule and I'm bleeding. So this is the version you're going to get of me today. And I'm really sorry. And I just make a joke of it as I move through it. And it really does lighten the experience. And I think that it gives me so much space to just be able to feel okay about being where I'm at.
I think the other thing that I've just noticed and been reflecting on is, as you kind of start to shift the way that you work, I've just had a few experiences of trying to push myself to do something really detailed in that plan and initiate phase, and having that kind of experience of being annoyed at myself and why is it taking so long and why is it still on the to-do list, and then actually hitting the complete and focus stage and being like, oh, I did that in 30 minutes. So if nothing else, just kind of paying a little bit of attention to how you're feeling is really useful. So when I'm ready to sort out the Lego, I'm like, oh, Luteal's here.
Exactly.
And I've just gotten a lot better, particularly when we kind of overlay the parenting and mum perspective. I've gotten a lot better kind of in the first few weeks of my cycle, just kind of going, yeah, the toys are everywhere. It's fine. I will get that boost of energy. I'll get my organizing energy soon. And I think that just kind of not pushing into it, yeah, I think it's always a good little thing to notice that if something's just keeps not making it to the top of a pile and you feel frustrated about it, maybe just think about what the right time is to do it. Because so many of those things are the how real is the deadline is the other thing.
Yes.
And what have you, is it really helpful, that kind of I didn't get to it today, I didn't get to it today, I didn't get to it today. And I just found that to be really game changing, to actually be like, I'm just going to leave that for a week because the right week is going to be next week.
Well, and I find for myself too, when I look, because I am a super organizer. I like charts. I like Excel spreadsheets. So I'll have my monthly to-dos of everything that I want to do, everything that I feel like I have to accomplish. And some of it is repetitive stuff, like you said, like sending out my weekly email or social media or whatever the case might be. And that list can get quite long. And if you're just looking at that of okay, well, I'm just going to go in today and I'm going to tackle it. It's really, I think that we spend a lot of time our, without even being cognitive at it. I think our hormonal body is just like, this is not very structured. Like I don't know where I'm at here. And I feel like what I do is then I take that list and then I break it out into those 4 pillars of like, these are the things, the best time. Do I always do them in those ones? Probably not. A lot of times I'm like, well, that list was a little too long for my follicular phase, but you know what? I got some of it done. And then I try to like tackle some of the other ones in the other phases. But at least then I know what's going to excite me, what I'm actually going to really enjoy doing. When I love filing in my luteal phase, like that is like my dream, is just to sit there and organize paper. Like it's just so entertaining for me. But to have the energy to like book guests to be on the podcast and to reach out to people and say, hey, like, do you want to go for coffee, and to create those collaborations? I love doing that booking part in my follicular phase. Like that is where I'm more outgoing. I feel like I can plan and book into my ovulation and get things going. We are talking on this podcast today on day 1 of my ovulation. It is fantastic. I was so excited. It's perfect timing. But yeah, I feel like it gives me a sense of structure. And I like having that structure about knowing all of these things and then when to really do them. And here's the thing is like, we could map it out of like, these are your 4 phases and these are the times to do these tasks, which, logically might make sense, but it doesn't mean that it works for everybody to do those things. For instance, like I know that when I was doing a lot of my research, and I know Kate often says like she likes to record her video content in her fall because she feels a little bit more spicier. Like she just doesn't care what people say or what she says and how it's going to affect people. She just says what she wants to say, right? With no real big filter sometimes, so that she can be authentically herself. For me, recording it in my fall, I stumble over my words. I have slower thinking processes. It just doesn't work for me, right? But this is the beauty, is that I know why it doesn't work for me. And it's because that energy and my personality, I'm more of an introvert. I need to call really on that follicular part of my face, the first half of my cycle, to pull out that extrovertedness of me, which does not exist at all in the second half of my cycle.
You just reminded me of something really useful that I thought I would share, which is when you first start doing this work, so it was really great doing Kate's course and kind of seeing everyone follow this pattern. So you get introduced to this work and you kind of get how it works within the month, and maybe you menstruate or maybe you don't. And then you kind of go, oh, and then the moon cycle. And then you go, oh, and then the seasons. And just there's this real tendency to massively overthink.
Yes.
Sometimes there'd be this question about like, it's winter, but I need to do something. Like, what do I do? And so I do think there's that nice thing of moving out of the mind and into the body on these things. Mm-hmm. And that's such a good example that you just shared about 2 different people actually finding the different phases useful for different things. And that kind of question about what am I excited in, or what am I attracted to doing right now? Like that's just as kind of good as any other kind of philosophy or mode to kind of deciding what the best thing is for you to do next.
Let's be real. Juggling all the to-dos and the expectations in the modern world can be downright overwhelming for any woman. High demand jobs, managing a home, tending to our children, and trying to nurture our relationships while still tending to our own needs can feel like a tall mountain to climb. But what if there were hacks, simpler ways to manage your life while still deeply tending to who you are? Drumroll, please. Introducing the menstrual cycle. Your menstrual cycle and your womb wisdom hold valuable information on how to align your life so that you can reduce your stress, kicking burnout to the curb and giving you the tool to organize your life according to the energy of your hormones. January 28th, I will be hosting a very special masterclass called Burnout to Balance, where I will teach you how to tap into the wisdom and transform your life. It is time to say bye-bye to the modern burnt-out woman and hello to the modern wise one. To register for this free event, click on the link in the show notes below.
I've got a really great friend who's really into science. And during the pandemic, we used to walk every week, and I was telling her about my kind of cyclical living. And she just, she was pretty skeptical. And then about 6 months later, she said, I've started doing that for exercise, and it's really changed my life. And I do think exercise is a nice little entry in to getting used to kind of your cycle and what it means and how your energy is, because it's such a physical practice.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us do really kind of take that really masculine approach of like, on Monday I go here, on Wednesday I go there, which which makes sense because all of our systems and our weeks and our kids' school things, and they are all built on this kind of days of the week approach. But I think exercise is a really nice entryway, because maybe I still do go to yoga on Monday, but I know that I show up in a slower way. I show up in a different way. I don't take, the kind of hardest version of that pose. So I think that can be a really, if work feels kind of too constrained, too overwhelming, that can be a nice way to start introducing the thinking, introducing the knowledge, and then you can start kind of moving into how you can apply it into the workday as well.
And like what you're saying, like you're doing a yoga pose and it's like, well, this is too much. And so you just back off, because that maybe for you, that's in your second half of your cycle, most likely, that it just feels like it's too much, right? And the same goes with our work schedule. Like we may not be able to schedule things perfectly, but when something feels too much, we have this allowance or this forgiveness of going, oh, but that's because I'm here. So you know what, this is going to take me a little bit longer. Or, for myself, one of the things I notice is sometimes the scatteredness I feel in my follicular phase, in my inner spring, because there's just there's that rising energy that's coming and that little bit of excitement that all of a sudden I have like all these ideas and all these things that I want to do, and I can't stay focused very long on one thing. Like I'm always hopping, which, it's great. But at the same time, sometimes I'm like, I can't wait for my fall to come so I can just sit down and focus and complete something because now I've started all these little projects. And so it's really, what I love about this is not even so much, well, I do love the organizing, let's be real, but I also like that it gives me something as a tool to feel in and connect with my body. I feel this way, and be curious of going, well, why do I feel this way? Is it because of my cycle, or is it because I had a sick child that kept me up all night, and it has nothing to do with my cycle, and it has everything to do. Yeah, exactly. Everything to do with sleep deprivation, right? Like, and so
yes.
It's really a beautiful tool for us just to get curious about how we're feeling, versus living in this paradigm where it's like, but these are the expectations and you rinse and repeat no matter what, right? Which keeps us so disconnected from our body. And I just love that this is a tool for me to connect deeper with me.
It also keeps us really unproductive. So when we try to, and look, I see this across both genders, when we try to just kind of go at 110% all the time, it's just physically impossible. Mm-hmm. And when I do see people who are really in burnout, who are really working in, I'm going to call it a stagnant way, even though it's like kind of high energy, but just like the same day on day on, like the quality of work gets significantly worse. We all know this in ourselves. It takes us 3 hours to do the things that it would take us 30 minutes if we were well rested. And I think that's really useful to put in the mix, particularly I find just like those first 2 days of menstruation, like if you can really protect and guard them, and is there really anything that can't wait to 48 hours? And if there is, if there is the board meeting, what can you do to make that the 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of energy? And what else can you like push out and move away to kind of make that protection? And the other thing I've been developing, and I'd love to hear if your listeners have other tips to share, is what are some tools I can use to kind of supplement? So, for example, when I'm in my luteal phase, so that complete and focus phase, but I need to kind of, it would really help me to come up with some ideas. And sometimes that happens. So I'll be like, I'm ready to write all of my social media posts, but I didn't actually harvest the plan and initiate. So now I've got no ideas. Like I use AI a lot for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know that if it was in the plan and initiate phase, I would have 24 ideas, but just this week I don't. So there's a tech tool that can help me do that. You know, if you're in plan and initiate and all the ideas are kind of landing, but the actual like writing of the paper is really hard for you, or maybe like that's not a great time for proofreading, like can someone else help you with that? Can you ask someone else to run their eyes over it? Like how can you use different resources, and sometimes it's technology and sometimes it's other people that you work with to balance out, instead of actually just trying to push into that zone yourself?
You want to know my little trick for that first half of the cycle when there's all those ideas and like you got tons of them? Because I'm also like that I can't sit down and write them. And they always come to me at the worst times. Like I'm driving and like 15 ideas come. I have so many voice memos on my phone.
Yep.
So I
Great.
literally put on the voice memo and I just talk to myself.
Yeah, great.
In the grocery store or whatever. I'm like, okay, these are all the ideas that I have. And then I just have to go back to them in my phone. So once again, it's a technology to help me get through it. But you open the door to a conversation. I've been kind of itching to bring this into our conversation. So I'm glad that the opportunity is here now, because you were talking about menstruation and how is it really important for that 48 hours? And if you're in the board meeting, right? I think this is a great opportunity to also start to reflect on how, as cyclical women, knowing this, we can now become more supportive to other women in our workforce. There is something so beautiful that when we tap into understanding our own cycle and our own body, that we create this space and the environment for other women to do the same. So we walk past a coworker's office and she's a little bit more edgier than normal, or, she just snapped at somebody, or she is feeling very overwhelmed. Without even saying, are you bleeding? You could probably just be like, I bet you she's coming onto her menstruation or there. So what can I do to relieve her? So that might be my cue, without even words, of just going in there going, hey, you know what? I've got some extra time. Can I take something off your workload? Like, can I take this back? Or maybe I just don't bug her, right? Like, or I say, it's totally okay to close your door and everyone's going to survive. Like you can do this. And then maybe at lunchtime, I bring her a little brownie or something of just like, here's some little love for you. Right. And like, I think when we as women know this about our cycle and we know how to start implementing it into our life, we create this environment that softens the landing for every other woman that we work for. And then that is what creates the culture that creates that positive period environment where we can exist differently than the structure that we're working in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are principles we want to put in place always, which is how can we support each other at work? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, I that's why I do think if we're not kind of quite ready to have direct conversations, I don't really mind this kind of like talking in code to start with, because at least we've started somewhere. And that's why I do. And, I work for myself. I share my diary with an assistant who I work with heaps, who I really love. And even I felt a bit exposed about having those things in my calendar, which is why I do love kind of using the phase names, what's the prompt. So I think there's a nice way for us to think about like, what would it take for us to have this conversation in a way that we felt comfortable with, so that we can kind of, as you said, with the maternity leave, like we can keep normalized, we can keep moving forward.
Yes.
Into just, being real about what is a very real experience of all people who menstruate have.
Yes. And I think we create by doing that, by living in alignment with our energy and our hormones and getting playful with trying to curate a work environment that supports our needs in our body and our energy, is that it also creates that space for the men in our life. Like, I
Hmm.
know this is a focus on women right now and on our cycle, but let's be honest, the workplace is also very pressuring for men of like, it's not okay to take a sick day for your kids. It's not okay to not perform at this level all the time. And I think when we give forgiveness for other coworkers, female, that, we can work as a team, we can collaborate. It also gives that energy or that message out to the workplace that it's like, it's okay for you to have a bad day too, right? Like, that's cool. We will work around this. We'll find a way to support each other. It's not on the same as a cyclical level, but I think it does give that message that men can also have their off days as well, and that it's not just this culture that we're constantly sponsoring of push harder, do more, performance is everything.
Yeah, and I think it's nice to think about, if I think about my performance over a 12-month period as opposed to over a day-to-day proposition, I think that's really useful as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, my husband does a lot of litigation because he works in law, he's a lawyer. And sometimes he'll have done a massive trial and he'll be so exhausted and he'll come home and he'll say, "Oh, I didn't get much done today." It's like, of course you didn't. You haven't taken a break. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the brain just kind of overrides you. And they're like, "I see that you haven't taken a break. I'm going to just make sure that you can procrastinate as much as possible. Because, like, I'm not really here to keep showing up like this, particularly once the adrenaline's gone down." So, yeah, it's definitely something that, yeah, we're seeing for everyone in the
Mm-hmm.
kind of way that we've really set up our workplaces.
Yes, for sure. So I'm curious, do you have any, how do I want to phrase this? Do you have any like brilliant ideas that have not been put into practice yet of how we're going to create this cyclical workplace that is so supportive for women, and that's going to change the way we're doing things? Any wish list ideas or any ideas out there that you're like, someday this is going to happen?
I think that when we kind of start this, my broad thinking is that we are much better to set up workplaces that support the fact that no human being can be productive 24/7. Like, we are not machines. I just found in my experience in working with HR, when we start kind of getting specific about what one section of the population needs, it's so easy to kind of create division instead of cohesiveness. So I'm really interested about workplaces that are really, really good. This is so boring. I'm so sorry. But it actually, I think the crux of the problem is, do we have enough resources for the things that we actually need to do? Because I think we're really building workplaces where people are doing the work of one and a half people. And the more that we keep doing that, the more we'll keep building workplaces that work like that. And so it's that interesting intersection between individual reaction and response and kind of collective movement and changes. But I think if we think about what we can do as individuals, I think, yeah, putting boundaries around our workload and not continuing to kind of get sucked into this idea that we need to do the work for one and a half or two people is actually really powerful. Like, if we all did that,
Mm-hmm.
then we'd probably see a change. I know that puts a lot of pressure on. I understand there's heaps of power dynamics and financial dynamics and all kinds of things that make that really, really difficult. But we are so wide. I think we want to belong, we want to do well. Yeah, and I think not kind of running into the ground is one of the most powerful things we can do.
And for me, I think like my number one idea that comes to mind of how we can start to create some resolution around this issue is really starting to honor that flexibility has
Mm,
power, right? I think the workplace for so long has been structured with the patriarchal system where it really is about control, where it really is about if we give any room for flexibility, everyone's going to go wild and do their own thing, which is so far from the truth. And I think when we start to break away from this idea of rigid rules and structures, we create opportunity for way more production, way better quality of work,
mm,
and way more health and sustainability for your staff. And so, like, what I think of most often is the 9 to 5, right? Like this idea that we have to put in 8 hours. And it's so funny. This was brought to my attention not too long ago about the fact that it's like, well, people have to work 8 hours. And people forget that that 8 hours was actually to protect the employee, that the employer didn't overwork them. It was never about that the employee owes this to the employer, but somewhere that's kind of got swapped in our mentality of that they have to put in this many hours, which isn't real. And so if we create more flexibility, and I think COVID was so beautiful for this, that
mm,
it forced employers and enforced these systems and structures to have to trust the unknown. They had to trust that people were going to work from their homes. They were going to have to trust that people could put on a fancy top and keep their pajama pants on and it'll all be okay. And that the Zoom world was not going to explode. Right. And, one of my mentors, she always said that when she became a new mom and she was building her business, but still needed to have a job to supplement income, she went in there and said, can I, like, these are my tasks. This is what you want me to do in a day. If I get this done in 5 hours and it's good and I'm meeting the measures and everything, do I really have to put in that extra 3 hours of dead time? And they're like, if you can get it done, you can leave whenever. And so that's what she did. She worked for someone that was a forward thinker of thinking like, as long as it gets done, I don't care how many hours you're here. I'm paying for this productivity, right? And so she would close her door, she wouldn't go on her phone, she wouldn't take her breaks, and she would get it done. And it created such a better work environment for her because it met her. That's not going to work for everyone. But this is the
mm.
beauty, is that when we start to trust the people that we employ versus saying it's only going to be right if it fits this way, then we really close people off. And I think this is where, just that little bit of flexibility. Like if you're bleeding, can you work from home those days? Right?
Absolutely.
Do you
If
have to
you
go in
want,
office?
yeah, and if anyone's interested to kind of know more about that in a structural way, there's a great book called The Result Only Work Environment. I can't remember the author's name. One of them's called Jodie. But two women have written this great book, and it's quite old, actually. It's been around for a while. And it's about, measuring outputs, not inputs.
Yeah.
So they set up a whole like medium-sized business too, not kind of like 10 people, like hundreds of people working in this way, this results only work environment way. So if you've got any CEOs listening or any executives, have a look at that very kind of well-researched, well-structured way that you can actually flip the script on input versus output in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
a lot of people, like, don't get me wrong, some people are paid an hourly wage, but a lot of people are paid salary. And so
Mm.
this idea of having to work, like, I don't know, I just feel like flexibility is going to be the key that's going to help everybody, because it is when we have not only creating space for a woman to work cyclically, but when she starts to honor her rhythm, we start to see some of those health concerns go down. We see those big menstrual flare-ups or some of these bigger conditions that might take us out, infertility, like all these doctor's appointments. Like when we really start to nurture this idea of wellness and working within our energy and our um, hormonal needs, then we do create a system where, someone's wellness can be really well cared for. And then we are going to have better productivity versus forcing someone to work when they feel like crap. Right. So I don't know. This is my idea, my dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me today.
Oh my God, this was such a good conversation. So for anybody listening, I hope this was a lot of takeaways for you. It was so great to have you on here. And if anyone is interested, you'll find all of Ellen's contact details down below, but she's also starting a podcast of her own. So it's not released yet. So you're going to want to follow her so that way you know when it actually launches out into the big wide world web, and start listening to that. I can't wait to hear your words of wisdom on your podcast.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I'm starting a podcast with my sister. I will tell you a little bit about it because I reckon your listeners will really like it. My sister's a human design coach and I'm an executive coach. So we are bringing those two things together, the cosmic and the corporate, and talking about how we can kind of interact those two sides of the coin. Yeah. So it's a podcast for the cosmically confused and the corporately challenged.
I love it.
And we'll be having a chat about, what's showing up for us, how we're learning from each other, and then also answering some listener questions. So we're really looking forward to it.
I'm so excited to listen to it. That's great. So all of that information is going to be in the show notes below. And once again, thank you so much for coming back, and come back again. I always love these conversations. Come back again.
You're welcome.
Are you excited about aligning to your cycle? If so, make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and like the episode if it really resonated with you. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.